Now we are going with a new talk, with a new, we are inviting someone who is really already working with a lot of entrepreneurship. She's an innovator. She's already making the change. So everyone say hi to Trisha. Trisha Prabhu is a 21-year-old innovator, social entrepreneur, a global advocate, and an inventor of Rethink, a patented technology and an effective way to detect and stop online hate at the source before bullying occurs and the damage is done. So it's so cool that the fact that she's working with STEAM to solve a social problem that it's so common in youth. She's such a cool, and she's so cool. I think I'm going to learn a lot from you right now, because as someone who makes technology, I really want to know how you came with this idea, how you're working right now. She is globally acclaimed as a researcher, because she has found that with Rethink, adolescents change their mind with 93% of the time and decide not to post offensive messages. So she's already making a change in a lot of people in the world. As a social entrepreneur, Trisha has received worldwide acclaim in the business world, including in 2021 as the youngest honoree named to Forbes 30 under 30 social impact list. I hope one day I can be in that list. So cool to have you here and you are on that list. Trisha has also sparked a rallying cry against online hate. To, Today, she has shared a rethink message in over 60 more, or 60 and more keynotes in 30 and more cities in 3 languages. And she's also an ardent supporter of empowering women in the entrepreneurial community. When she's not doing all of that, Trisha is currently pursuing her undergraduate education at Harvard University in Cambridge, Massachusetts. So she's really doing a lot of amazing jobs. She has an amazing journey and a story. And I'm so excited to hear you, Trisha. Please, the floor is yours.
Thanks so much for having me. As again, thank you for the incredibly kind introduction. As was said, my name is Trisha Prabhu. I am the founder and CEO of Rethink, a social venture dedicated to tackling cyberbullying and ending digital violence. And I'm here today to talk a little bit about my journey, and what first me got me into this space, what first got me excited, about wanting to work on this issue and really passionate about making change, and then talking a little bit about my innovation process and what it looked like to go from caring about an issue to solving an issue. And I hope I'm going to be able to end, time wise, with a couple tips for all of you on how to be a STEM innovator. The tips that I wish that I knew when I first got into this work, and I hope to impart to all of you, because I know that all of you are incredibly capable, and just have so much to offer the world. So I want to start, by bringing us all the way back to 2013. I was a seventh grader in middle school, and I came home from school one day to read online the story of a young girl that you see here on the screen, Rebecca Sedgwick. She was 12 years old, and she had been cyberbullied for over a year and a half. She had received, just countless terrible messages. The world would be better without you. No one likes you. I mean, just these really, really awful, heartbreaking messages. And it got to a point where she couldn't take it anymore. And so one day she climbed at the top of her town's water tower and jumped off. And I remember at 13 reading that story and thinking, oh my goodness, there's something clearly wrong here. How can it be that we live in a digital world where this kind of violence, both online, which then leads to offline violence, can be okay? And I started to do more research and I started reading all of these stories about all of these young people, many of whom, had very similar narratives. And while, self harm was a very extreme case, what wasn't extreme were other side effects, right? Like depression, anxiety, low self esteem. And the fact was that was a problem because it was affecting so many youth. As the introductor mentioned, cyberbullying is a problem that is very youth specific. 52% of the world's youth, that's all around the world, have at some point during their digital experience received at least one harassing message, which is really shocking to think about, right? It shows you the magnitude of the problem. And so, as I continue to do research, I continue to pull out these, statistics that made it very clear to me. Cyberbullying is a silent pandemic. 1.8 billion young people at risk. But the statistic that really stood out to me was this 90% statistic, because it was a statistic about current existing solutions in the space. As I learned more about this problem, I got curious, and maybe some of you have also become curious given the issues that you're interested in. I got curious, okay, what are the existing solutions in this space? And at the time, the existing solution was, if you're a victim of digital violence or online harassment, you should go and tell a parent, right? You should go or tell a teacher. And intuitively, that makes sense, right? That's ideally what we would want young people to do. We'd want them to go tell a parent or teacher. But research finds that over 90% of victims of cyberbullying choose to tell no one. They choose not to tell anyone because it's a shameful, deeply painful experience. And so, with those statistics and with that picture of the problem in mind, I decided to turn to science to find a solution. In particular, I had this set of facts. I had a clear understanding of the social problem. I decided, okay, cyberbullying is a huge problem, right? So I'm going to focus in on a component of this big social problem that I think that I can solve, that I'm really interested in. And in this case, that component was, why is it that young people are so willing to post these offensive messages online? As a young person, I was pretty biased, but I didn't think that young people, were terrible, right? I didn't think that young people inherently, just were mean people. I was curious why this demographic in particular was so willing to post these offensive messages online. So I started reading all of these books. I looked into the science of young people, how they behave, why they behave. I started doing a lot of research into the development of the human brain. And that is when I stumbled upon an article that mentioned that the way that the human brain develops is it actually develops from back to front. So when you're born, the first part of your brains to develop are actually in the back, right back here. But then by the time you're 13, about 90% of your brain, everything from back here to almost up here, has been fully developed. All that remains is this front part. I thought that's so curious. What's happening up here that hasn't been developed when someone's, say, 12 or 13 years old and just got onto a social media app? And it turns out that this front part of the brain, it's called the prefrontal cortex, and it controls decision making and impulse control. In other words, we are giving young people all around the world access to the internet and social media, places that are often filled with a lot of hate and expectations and judgment, at a time when their brain is not fully equipped to make thoughtful decisions. I'm sure you've had this experience. I've absolutely had this experience, right? When you say something or you do something, and then you want to bite your tongue. You feel so bad. You wish you could take it back, but it's too late. And it was almost like in that moment, you weren't really thinking about what you were doing. It turns out that that isn't just a flaw that any one person has. It's actually a product of the way that our brains develop and why teens sometimes aren't super equipped to make the best decisions. So, with that scientific understanding in mind, a light bulb went off in my head. I thought, huh, that's so interesting. What if I could create a technology that could force young people to think about what they were doing online? It would interrupt that very impulsive decision making process and go, whoa, hold on. Are you sure you want to say something offensive? And so this is actually a prototype we see here on the left side of the screen of the very first rethink technology. This was one of the first sketches I did, and one of then the first POC prototypes that I created. The idea was if you, for example, have two people chatting in a social media app, and one person tries to say something offensive, "You are so ugly." Rethink would detect that message and then prompt the user, "Whoa, this message may be offensive. Are you sure you want to say that?" Now, of course, when I first, kind of came up with this idea as a young person, I was skeptical in the sense that I wasn't really sure that young people were actually going to rethink, right? How did I know that they were going to choose, I'm not going to go ahead and post as opposed to, you know what, I want to go ahead and post it anyway. I didn't know. So I decided to go out there and conduct an experiment. As part of a school science fair project, I spent almost 9 months and over 1,500 trials validating the rethink concept. I built a software system prototype. I spoke with hundreds of students across the state of Illinois, and I saw if and how their behavior changed on the social media like environment when they had access to a rethink technology. And I compared that behavior to, behavior without the rethink technology. And the research, the results were stunning. Over 93% of the time, young people who had access to the rethink technology changed their minds and decided not to post an offensive message. So the overall willingness to post a message like, "You are so ugly," dropped from 71% to 4%. As a teen, I had stumbled upon the world's most effective, proactive solution to tackle online hate. I was shocked. And so I started to get a lot of attention. People were really excited. People were, really, just blown away by these results and by this technology. And I had a mentor come to me and say, this can be so much more than just a science experiment, Trisha. You can actually create a product that can hopefully curb cyberbullying and end digital violence for millions of young people globally. And I thought, oh my gosh, what an incredible idea. So then the next year of my life, following the science experiment and the validation of the Rethink concept, was building out a Rethink app, which today is available on both the Google Play Store and the App Store. It was actually named one of Google Play's most innovative apps back in 2016. And the way it works is when you download the Rethink app onto your phone, our custom built Rethink keyboard, which you can see in this image here, replaces your mobile device's default keyboard. Then it works across all of the apps on your phone, from email to social media, to give you a chance to rethink. And more often than not, we see young people making the right decision, choosing not to say something that could be harmful. And ultimately, we're helping cultivate this new generation of digital citizens who are kind, who are thoughtful, who are respectful. So, yes, today we've made a ton of impact. We've reached millions of young people, introduced the Rethink technology in our movement to these young people globally. And we've done it through, the support that we've had from partners and on stages ranging from TED, to Shark Tank to the White House. So I know we're coming up briefly, on time, and so I want to be, respectful of the fact that there's a very busy schedule ahead of us. So I just want to end here with a couple of tips for all of you on how to be a STEM innovator. Because one of the most common questions I get is, it's an amazing story, Trisha, but you were just a kid, and how did you think about actually doing all of this stuff? What tips would you have, to actually be successful? Because there's an issue that I care about, but I don't really know how to get started. I want to start by emphasizing innovation starts with you, and all of you have the potential and the possibility to make impact. So I really want you to believe that, and I really encourage you to think about how you can use STEM to make positive social impact. Here are my 4 tips for all of you. First, find a problem you're passionate about. Innovation is hard, invention is hard. As I mentioned, I wasn't talking about, a couple days. I was talking about months. I was talking about years of work to get to where I am. So find a problem you really care about, right? The environment, gender equality, whatever it might be. Then think about ways that you can apply your unique STEM skills to that problem. As a teen, I was super passionate about coding. You probably picked up on that, given the way that I was describing my journey. But I was super passionate about coding. Maybe you're very passionate about, the hard sciences. Maybe you're very passionate about public health. Whatever STEM skills you have, think about what they are and how they can be applied to the problem. Right? I saw a problem technology had created and thought about a way that I could use technology to address that problem. So get creative. Then I would really encourage you to build a community. I had so many mentors, as I briefly mentioned, that encouraged me to pursue different pathways. Encouraged me to persist through this process. And finally, hustle, 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 hustle. So much of this is just putting yourself out there, knowing that there is potential to fail, but also knowing that failure doesn't really exist in this space. Because if your idea doesn't work, you've eliminated a possibility. You've made it that much easier for the field of science to find other solutions. And if your idea does work, you have the potential to transform so many lives. So don't be afraid to fail. Don't be afraid to get your hands dirty. Get in there and make some change. Thank you all so much.
Oh, Trisha, that was so cool. I didn't know how much impact do you have, but it's so amazing that through the years you maintain that impact, you maintain that emotion that you have about your project, because I see that passion that you have, and it's so lovely and inspiring. As you can see on the chat, there is a lot of people who are like, "Wow, how much I can learn from her in just some minutes." Imagine talking to her one afternoon. It will be so amazing, Trisha. So thank you so much. If you want to get in contact with Trisha, please look for her social media. She can be your next partner. She can be your next mentor, your next friend in this adventure of creating activism with STEAM. So it's so cool to have you here. Thank you so much, Trisha. See you
Thank
in the
you
next
all.
opportunity.
Thank
See
you.
you.